All right. I think we can start getting started. Folks, we do record these meetings just so that people who can't attend can watch later. But let me start out just by welcoming everybody and introducing myself. I'm Josh Kelly, the Solid Waste Program Manager at the state of Vermont. And with me today are Dennis Feckert with our certification section. Also in the room are Michelle, I'm going to Graciosi. Did I do it all right? All right. She's one of our newest staff members in the solid waste program and certifications. And online, I have Shannon Choquette and Anne Bajour with the materials management section within the solid waste program. We have some incredibly competent and experienced speakers today. I really shedding a lot of praise on them, but they're so I'm so excited to hear from them. These people who work in waste management and have decades of experience. We have with us Mike Parkowski with the Delaware Solid Waste Authority, and Susanne Miller, the director of the Maine Bureau of Remediation and Waste Management. And then we have Tom Kennedy with the Greater Upper Valley Solid Waste District, general manager of that district, and John Leddy with the Northwest Solid Waste Management District. Selves on mute, that would be great. We'll have time for questions later. Thank you, Ms. Stevens. Just make sure I'm looking at the chat.
Gosh, you didn't mention that Susan's from Maine.
Oh, and then Susanne Miller from Maine. If I didn't mention you, Suzanne, I'm so sorry. I'm looking at so many different things. It's really great to have you here. So we've been hosting, this is actually meeting number 4 of a future disposal capacity discussion for the state of Vermont. For some of our folks joining us for the first time, our speakers, we have one landfill in the state of Vermont. And its horizon is approximately 20 years, give or take, as we had discussed in one of our first meetings when Casella was represented here and explained what they saw as the life expectancy left. The real purpose for today in these meetings is to discuss with participants and with really waste experts the waste disposal needs of not only the state but looking outward at the region, because it is a regional sort of waste shed where materials are constantly moving. And the goal is for us to really create a short report for the Vermont legislature that highlights some of the most promising opportunities for future disposal capacity and the inherent challenges. And we've been hearing about them all the way through, and so that's why I'm really excited about the folks we have today. We do record each meeting. We have a web page where we post materials and slides that people share with us. And we have some older reports where we have studied this issue before. We've got those linked on that webpage. This is meeting number 4. And thank you, Michelle, for letting Terry in. And we're at the point where we're still exploring where we go from here. We've actually got quite a bit of information to synthesize for some plan. And I think today will be no exception. So we may be at the point where we have enough to create our report, but we have to assess that as a team after this meeting. So with that, I do just like to acknowledge in these discussions that we all produce waste and that we have a collective responsibility to manage it appropriately. And that's how I sort of approach these conversations. And I've been really, really pleased by the respectful dialogue that everybody has brought to this conversation. So with that, we will start out with Susanne Miller, if you don't mind starting us off, talking about what you're doing in Maine. Maine has some state-run landfill models. I'm interested in everything Maine, so I'm just going to turn it over to you and let you share with us what's going on in your great state. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much. So before I get started, I'm going to apologize if you hear any weird dog sounds, because I have several dogs and they're getting to that point of the year where it gets darker early and they think it's time to eat and they get really antsy. So I apologize for that in advance. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I put together a presentation this morning. That dog is trying to get at my screen here. Okay, here we go. Can you see? I can't tell if you guys can see this. Can you see this?
Yes, yes, we
All right.
can.
Let me, is it on the full screen or no?
It's not on full screen yet.
Let me see if I can figure this out. I'm not great at this. It's been a little while. Shoot. Anyone have any quick advice on how to get
Yeah,
this to full screen?
Yeah, if you press from beginning on
Yep.
the left, it should go into full screen.
Okay,
There you
great.
go.
And then you can use your keys to navigate through.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, so as Josh aptly introduced me, I don't need to reintroduce myself, but what I will say is that at the department, we have at the Bureau of Remediation and Waste Management, we cover several different program areas, and materials management happens to be one of them. We also cover things like, you know, petroleum responses, remediation sites, emergency response activities, and PFAS. And so with our materials management program, we cover everything from like recycling and sustainability to the solid waste realm, and then also hazardous wastes. So for the purposes of today's presentation, we're going to talk about waste generation and capacity. We're going to talk a little bit about their overall landscape in Maine, Juniper Ridge landfill, which is our state-owned landfill, out-of-state waste, and then some challenges and opportunities. And I'm going to go through this really quick. I can share the presentation with you after the fact. I just have to have someone review it. I haven't had a chance to get anyone to review it yet, so apologies if there's any errors. But the first thing I want to start with is that we completed a 5-year statewide Maine materials management plan in 2024. We presented that to the legislature. And in that plan, we said, you know, we got to do something bold here in Maine. We're running up against a potential capacity crisis. And we haven't really solved that problem yet. And, you know, each year it's becoming more and more of a impending sort of doom, I shall say. Hopefully we'll come up with some solutions, and we'll talk about that in the opportunities portion. But, you know, we're definitely very concerned here about capacity in Maine and how we're going to pay for the costs of all the waste that we generate. So if you are interested in looking at what we had in our report, a lot of the information in this slide presentation comes directly from this report that we did last year. And so I'll just leave it at that. So in Maine, we're generating waste in Maine, and it's, you know, as it with every other state, but it's increasing for us significantly. We, in our last report, the waste generation and capacity report that we issued in 24, we estimated by 1.3% over the past 5 years per year. So you can see some of the numbers here just in this little table. And what we gathered from all the data we collected is that, yes, our population's growing, but the pace at which waste is being generated far outpaces the population growth. So how much we're disposing of is growing a lot faster. And then here are some numbers that we're anticipating for in terms of tons per year on every 5-year basis. And the reason we use these 5-year basis numbers, these odd numbers, is because those are the years our 5-year materials management plans are due. So you can see it goes up, you know, every year just a little bit more. So waste generation is increasing, disposal capacity is decreasing. Why? What's going on? And there's a lot of reasons. So we'll kind of take these all by chunks. The first thing is that landfill expansion licenses are really unpopular. And that goes for any new landfills as well. And they're so unpopular that it's really difficult to cross the finish line for approvals just to expand an existing landfill. We'll talk a little bit more in detail about that as it relates to Juniper Ridge, but basically nobody wants a landfill near them. You know, landfills are icky. Nobody wants to think about it. It's not sexy to have one in your neighborhood. And so it's just really hard to get people to approve of them or think of them as something that's necessary. We also have a moratorium in Maine and statute on any new commercially owned and operated landfills. So that puts us in a position that if we want to have more landfills in Maine, they have to be state or municipally owned, or maybe some kind of regional you know, municipal organization. Like sometimes a number of municipalities will band together and develop some kind of waste facility. And then one of the other issues we're dealing with in Maine is that we have other types of waste disposal facilities like incinerators or MRFs, but right now those are idled. We've got one up in Orrington, which is the former Perk facility. It was an incinerator. It's been repurposed by a new company called Epic. Eagle Point Energy Company, I believe is the acronym stands for, and they're still idled. They're not operating yet. We also have in Hamden, Maine, a MRF that's a waste processing facility under our definitions. And that's owned by a municipal waste hub. And then they're working with a corporation called Innovative. And that's where the former Fiberite facility was cited to be. You may have heard of that, kind of through the news channels a couple years back. That facility got up and running for about a month or so, and then COVID hit, and then it just stopped. And so it's been stopped for since about 2021. And unfortunately, with both Epic and Municipal Waste Hub not operating, all of the municipal solid waste that goes to both of those facilities is now being bypassed from those facilities to our state-owned landfill, Juniper Ridge. So you can imagine that's like two very large, regional facilities. All of the waste that goes there just goes right past it and goes right to the state-owned landfill. So in addition to those reasons, we're also running out of capacity because of our biosolids utilization ban. So I think Maine is famous for being the first state to ban the land application of sludge and sludge derived products. And so that was put into law. It became effective in August of 2022. This little table here comes from a report that we had done to evaluate biosolids and waste management capacity in Maine by Brown and Caldwell back in 2023. You can see how much more waste is going to like Juniper Ridge and even Crossroads landfill, which is a commercial landfill, since 2019 when we really started looking for PFAS in sludge. 2019 was when we started to require testing for PFAS before sludge could be land applied, and that resulted in most municipalities sending their sludge to landfill at that time. And then 2022 is the year that it was effectively banned. I want to just talk a little bit about this for a second because the ban went into effect August 2022, but we ran into a real situation in March 2023. So a lot of the sludge that was going to Juniper Ridge landfill had to be turned away because there were some concerns about slope stability, and the landfill was very wet, and we had sort of what some folks have termed a crisis, where we had a lot of sludge piling up at municipalities. There was nowhere to put it, and in the end we had to take a lot of interesting steps, but notably a lot of the sludge ended up being transported across country lines up into Canada. There are a number of companies up in Canada that take and are still willing to take Maine sludge and then compost it and use it for their own compost, within the new laws and requirements they have up in Canada. But we don't have as much going up there anymore at this point. So that's another reason our capacity in our landfills is being impacted. And I think the big issue that, really should be mentioned is that the cost of disposal is a lot cheaper than it costs to recycle. In part, that's because Maine transportation is a nightmare. We have, not so great roads. We have a lot of decentralized and local small communities. It's challenging to pick up waste. It's challenging to get a large enough amount of waste to a central location. And a lot of our roads are pretty bad. And so it just becomes a lot cheaper to send stuff to a landfill than it does to go through the process of getting it recycled. And so in our 2024 report, we put this table in that talks about what some of those cost differentials are. And you can see it really does add up. So let's talk specifically about Maine's landfills. So we're a little different than Vermont. We've got 8 landfills that can take MSW or MSW bypass. 6 of them are municipally owned. One's commercially owned. That's the one in Norridge Walk. That's the waste management facility. The state-owned landfill, Juniper Ridge landfill, is owned by the state and operated by Casella. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. We also have 19 small municipal landfills. These are only allowed to take CDD. We have 8 generator-owned landfills. These are only allowed to take wastes that come from the specific generator operations. So for example, a paper mill is a good example. At one point, we had a lot of paper mills operating in Maine. They all had their own landfills. And basically, the only wastes they would take into their landfills would be from, the paper mill operations. They weren't really supposed to take in waste from somewhere else. I think they're allowed to take maybe up to 15% from somewhere else, but that's it. We have a handful of soon to be closing small municipal or regional landfills. And then we have over 400 closed municipal landfills, and that falls within our remediation program. And you can see just by looking at the pie chart, basically the biggest chunk here, over half of the waste goes to Juniper Ridge Landfill, our state-owned landfill. So let's talk a little bit about Juniper Ridge Landfill. The landfill itself is owned by the state. The Bureau of General Services, which is part of our, Department of Administrative and Financial Services agency, is who actually has the ownership of it. So DAFS is like the kind of agent, sort of like the equivalent of like the Bureau of General Services at the federal level. Like they handle everything from our fleet to our accounting to anything that, land or buildings that are owned. And so they also have the lucky position of being the owner of the landfill. And the landfill itself is operated by Casella. There's an operating services agreement that Casella and DAFS agreed upon. I think the first operating services agreement lasted for, was for 30 years. They've been in the process for the past couple of years of renegotiating that. But that's kind of, the last I heard, that's kind of stalled. And then the operations and licensing of the actual landfill falls to the Maine Department of Environmental Protection. So it's a little kind of an awkward relationship, right? Because the state is the state, most of the public sees the state as one entity, but we've got 2 separate state branches with different responsibilities for this state-owned landfill. One who owns it and works with the operator, the other who regulates and licenses it. I will mention that the operating services agreement with between Casella and the state, does talk a lot about the day-to-day operations, and it gives a lot of deference to Casella because Casella's got, all the experts that are going to manage the landfill. In turn, the state opted to give Casella that level of deference because Casella took on the financial liability of the landfill. So that's a really big deal. And I think that sometimes that fact, gets forgotten, which is that when all is said and done, the state's not going to be on the hook to pay for it to be cleaned up and moved. It's supposed to be on Casella, and that's part of that operating services agreement. So Juniper Ridge is only allowed to accept municipal solid waste as bypass, not as part of its normal waste stream. And I think that's really important to note because if you remember, I mentioned that the EPIC facility and the municipal waste hub facility, the incinerator and the MRF are both still idled. And so all the waste from the region that goes there still is going directly to Juniper Ridge landfill. So there's a lot more MSW going to Juniper Ridge than there has been in, subsequent, years and decades even. Typically speaking, Juniper Ridge was purchased by the state with the idea that it could take special wastes, things like CDD, things like sludge. But I don't think when the landfill was first purchased that anyone would have thought that as much MSW bypass would be going to it or sludge would be managed at landfills like it is now. So currently, Juniper Ridge accepts just over 50% of all of Maine's generated waste and 90% of Maine's generated sludge. So where are we at with Juniper Ridge landfill? Well, we're anticipated to be at full capacity. Totally full. The landfill will be full in 2028. So that's like 2 years. So we've got 2 years left of landfill capacity left at Juniper Ridge landfill. And so you're probably wondering, well, gosh, I hope you have a license expansion, or I hope your license expansion has been approved because they really need to start construction now. Well, we're not so lucky. So I kind of put in these little arrows, sort of the process to go forward for licensing a landfill in Maine. First, there has to be a preliminary information report, which is kind of like a big screening feasibility study, right? Like it's just a real quick, are we even going to get to the point where it's worth moving forward with this process? That's what the PIR is. The next step is a public benefit determination. This is an evaluation. It's an application that has to be submitted by the applicant, by Casella and the staffs, and they had to submit it to DEP, and then we had to review it to determine if there was a substantial public benefit for having this landfill expansion occur. And so there were a lot of public hearings involved and public meetings. And ultimately the department did approve the public benefit determination. And that's where we're at right now. We approved the public benefit determination in October of 2024. It was quickly appealed. The court held the hearing for this appeal. I want to say it was maybe about 5 or 6 months ago. And a decision still has not been made as to whether or not the PBD is going to hold or not. Because I can't speak for Casella or DAFS, but we have not, as the Department of Environmental Protection, we have not received an application for the license expansion yet. I don't know if they're waiting for the decision to come down on the public benefit determination or if there's other factors at play. But we have been told that we're going to get an application, so we're just waiting on that to happen. Assuming that we are able to go through the process of the license expansion, I'm sure it's the same in other states, but it's a very long process, right? Typically, if you count from the PIR through the end stages, it usually takes about 5 years to get through the licensing process. I would say even though the arrow is halfway through on this little arrow chart, we're not halfway through the process because the license expansion application is going to take a lot of time and review. There's going to be public hearings requested and public meetings. And we expect that even after it's issued, assuming it's issued, there will be more appeals. So the short version of all of this is that there's no way that the license is going to expand when it needs to in 2028. So one of the reasons why we keep getting so many appeals and concerns about the state-owned landfill is because there's this huge kind of perception out there that Juniper Ridge is taking waste from out of state and that we're filling up our landfill with waste that doesn't even start within Maine. And so as you all know, we can't interfere with the U.S. Commerce Clause, right? So like at a commercial landfill, like the one in the waste management facility in Norridgewock, we can't tell Norridgewock, you can't take waste from out of state because that would be a violation of the Constitution. However, with a state-owned landfill, we do have the authority to restrict out of state waste from going directly into the landfill. However, the waste management infrastructure that we all have, it's very interconnected. And so, for example, what's been happening in Maine is that Juniper Ridge takes in bulky waste and residue from a very specific commercial waste processing facility, who in turn takes pre-processed waste from out of state, processes it, and then all of the residues and oversized bulky pieces are then turned around and sent to Juniper Ridge. And so many people in the public see this as Juniper Ridge working around the restrictions for out-of-state waste. In our statutes, our legislature has tried to address this issue and has crafted some very specific legislation, the kind where you're really targeting it to one facility, but you don't want to name them in the statutes. So you have some really creative language, which has to do with how much waste they bring in and how much waste they're processing per year. And so that's has led to us to have very convoluted and complex legislation and statutes in Maine. And it just seems like it gets worse and worse each year. It's so very complicated. And to be honest with you, most folks that are working in the legislature and working on crafting language for the bill, we're all confused about what some of that language means. And so it's a real problem. And I would say in the upshot of all of this statutory construction is that I don't think in the end it's really reduced the amount of waste going to Juniper Ridge because the root cause problems have not been addressed. The 2 idle facilities, the sludge ban are just to name a few. And as you can imagine, many folks in Maine are very unhappy with how this is playing out. So I'm just going to recap the challenges to waste capacity issues in Maine, and then we're going to go on to a couple unknowns and then to our opportunities. So the challenges, again, increase in waste generation. We've got a sludge ban. Sludge isn't decreasing. And then bulk materials that we use to add to sludge to keep landfill stability in check uses even more landfill space. It makes the landfill fill up even faster. We have alternative waste disposal facilities that are idled. We don't have a lot of new infrastructure coming in to manage sludge and MSW. And unfortunately, the way our statutes are currently constructed is that it's very difficult. Some of these new types of methodologies and technologies, it's really difficult to permit these with the way that our laws and rules work in Maine. And that's something we're trying to work on as we update our rules. The public doesn't seem to want to accept that there is a need or that landfills are important. And the Juniper Ridge license in particular is tied up in court. It's very controversial. More challenges, the region as a whole is already struggling with disposal options. So we don't have enough incinerators, sewage sludge incinerators, or even landfills in the region. Couple that with the fact that many states are thinking about or have already banned land application of sludge in the region. We seem to be doing this more than other parts of the country. That's just adding to, we're generating more and there's less room for us to put it somewhere. Other challenges for Maine is transporting waste out of state is just prohibitively expensive. Taxpayers are going to feel the pinch. Maine is a lot farther than some of the other New England states from major transportation corridors. We have a lot of small decentralized communities and really terrible conditions for our roads. So it just ends up costing an awful lot to get from point A to point B. And then of course, finally, recycling is more expensive than disposal. So here's some unknowns. Here's some pictures. We've got the judge and his gavel. We don't know what's going to happen with Juniper Ridge and the public benefit determination. The picture to the left top, that's the former Perk incinerator facility, now Epic. The picture to the bottom right, that's the municipal waste hub facility, the former Fiberite facility. They're still redesigning and getting everything moving, but they're licensed to start taking in more waste. They're already starting to take in a little bit more waste than they were, just 6 months ago. They're working towards putting in an anaerobic digester at the end of their system, and they're trying to do some trial runs and to get a better understanding of their waste feedstocks so that they can design everything appropriately. So we feel pretty good about that facility. We think it's going to be, a good addition to managing waste for the region, but it's going to take a couple years before it's fully up and running. And then the picture on the bottom left shows a bunch of packages, because one of the opportunities we have that we're going to talk about is our new environmental stewardship program for packaging. So opportunities. We do have a sludge dryer that's going to be coming online early 2026. That's at the waste management facility in Norridgewock. The idea is this sludge dryer should be able to take 83% of Maine's sludge, provided that it only, contracts with Maine facilities. So it's about 73,000 tons per year of sludge that it can take. That picture up on the right is where they're at with the construction process. So they already have the building up. All the equipment is in the US. They were somehow lucky enough to get it before any tariffs kicked in. And so, we're fully anticipating, having some more options in 2026 for sludge management. And remember, as the sludge volume decreases going into Juniper Ridge, that means that, potentially there's also decrease of CDD and bulky waste to bulk that sludge as well, which, might help prolong some of that capacity for a little bit longer. The other big deal that we're working on is our EPR for packaging law. So the implementation should begin soon. We've pretty much finished our rulemaking process. We're in the process now of putting the RFP together for a stewardship organization, which we are going to be issuing in 26, and we hope to select the stewardship organization in 26 as well. And then in 2027, the program will begin its full implementation, and municipalities are supposed to receive reimbursements from the program that'll help them, with education outreach and also building new infrastructure as needed. The long and short of it is that the idea is that the people who are putting packaging together and using packaging, which, piles up in our landfills, are going to be more on the hook for paying for how it gets disposed of. So if it's really easy to recycle, it gets recycled. And if it's not easy to recycle, they have to pay in a little bit more. And so that's the, really big overview of how that program works. And then finally, I see this as an opportunity, even though it's also a challenge, which is that there's so much controversy surrounding Juniper Ridge. There's been a lot of attention in the news. There's been a lot of legislative oversight. There's a lot of public awareness and participation. I see this as a good thing because now people are really talking openly about how important solid waste management is, how important it is to plan, whether it's landfills or recycling programs. It's at the forefront of discussion for a lot of people in Maine. And so even though these issues are very tricky and it's going to take some time to, wade through them and come up with solutions, I think it's a great thing that people are paying attention because, most of the time people don't pay attention to things like where their waste is going. So with that, thank you for the opportunity to present today. And it sounds like we're going to have questions at the end, perhaps.
Yes, Suzanne. So everything's easy in your life, basically, is what you're saying. There's no
Yes.
complexity at all. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I think, let's see, do we have any questions virtually or in the room for Suzanne? I think that was very, very interesting. Yeah, we have one from Ms. Stevens. Go ahead, Ms. Stevens.
Hi, and maybe if you want me to, I can just wait for the end. There were two terms that that were mentioned. One was the stewardship organization, and the other was a waste hierarchy. So if it's better to wait till the end, that's fine.
I think those are quick. Suzanne, those are pretty quick, right?
Yeah, I think so. So the stewardship organization is basically, it's going to be kind of like an oversight organization, umbrella organization that's basically going to administer the program for the state. So it's like so instead of the state overseeing every time, collecting monies and all of the administration of the packaging program, we're going to have a separate entity take care of that for us. And that's how that's going to work. The waste hierarchy is basically in Maine law, we have a hierarchy for how waste gets disposed of. So sort of like the bottom of the waste hierarchy, the least desirable thing is landfilling and incineration. And the most desirable thing is like reuse.
Thank
Great.
you.
And Ms. Stevens, if you ever, or if that's Peggy, I think that's Peggy. If you ever want to talk about, we do have these in Vermont. We just don't have it for packaging yet. We have that for our battery program. We have a stewardship organization that really handles all the details of collection and recycling of batteries for Vermonters, including outreach and education. And we really, it gives us breathing room to focus on ensuring that their program is effective while they take care of the logistics. It's been a really great thing for the state and for Vermonters when it comes to a new thing like battery recycling. So Maine's ahead of us with packaging for sure.
Well,
Let's go to Shannon.
Thank
Go ahead.
you.
Sorry. Yeah. Shannon, go ahead.
Yeah, you mentioned MSW bypass. I'm a little confused about what MSW bypass is. Could you explain that?
Sure. So basically, MSW is your municipal solid waste that's generated by the municipalities. And so typically, like, let's say you had an incinerator, the incinerator would take that municipal solid waste, but there are times when like it's going to be shut down for maintenance. And during that time period, that facility can't continue to take in the municipal solid waste. So it's bypass, or it's taken instead of to that facility, it bypasses it and goes on to another facility that can take it at that time. So, in terms of Juniper Ridge, what that means is that Juniper Ridge is not allowed to take straight up municipal waste from a municipality. But if that waste was going to go to the incinerator by contract, then, and the incinerator's down, then the waste can be bypassed and sent over to Juniper Ridge. So it's kind of convoluted.
Thank
Great.
you.
Suzanne, thank you so much. If you're willing to hang out, great. But if you need to go, totally understand. That was a ton. And thank you for doing both, exactly what I was hoping for, challenges and opportunities. There's some really cool things in the opportunities, and we share many of your challenges just in a different flavor. I'm going to turn over to Mike Parkowski. Mike is the Chief of Business and Government Services with the Delaware Solid Waste Authority. They have also a very interesting story. Mike, take it away.
Thanks, Josh. So I'm going to really, I don't want to repeat a lot of things Susan said because a lot of the things are very similar. But I will just talk about our structure because Delaware Solid Waste Authority is very unique to how we handle waste compared to other states. I won't say there aren't any other waste authorities. There certainly are, but the way we do it on a statewide basis is pretty unique, and the timing of how our organization was created and the purpose is very unique in that Delaware is a small state, of course, and compared to Vermont, we're much smaller in size, but we have more people than Vermont has. We also, I would say, we're kind of new to some of the things. We got a late start on some of the things that a lot of the New England states initiated early. And what I mean by that is, I'll get into that a little bit later when we talk about recycling, but a lot of our recycling initiatives really came along much later than some of the New England states had. So our organization was really created out of necessity in the early 70s when EPA came online. Delaware had basically just a series of open dumps throughout the state that were run by really either run at a county level or a municipality level. And so these towns all throughout the state had very small dumping areas where they had no environmental protection whatsoever, just digging a hole in the ground and putting trash in it. And that was not really uncommon in the United States before EPA came along. But in Delaware, the government kind of recognized early on that these regulations were coming on, that we had to create sanitary landfills. And by doing so, they knew that was going to cost a lot of money, and that the municipality certainly didn't have that type of money to spend on converting these small little dumps into sanitary landfills. And frankly, it wouldn't have made a lot of sense because they didn't have a lot of acreage there to convert into a landfill. So Delaware Solid Waste Authority was created by state law in 1975. And instead of being a state agency, we're a state authority, which is run by a board of directors, which is appointed by the governor and confirmed by the Senate. We have 7 individuals that serve as a voluntary capacity. They're not paid. They're, like I said, they're selected by the governor, and then they have to be confirmed by the state Senate. They serve various terms, staggered 3-year terms, and then the chairman of our board serves at the leisure of the governor. And just from a geographic thing, Delaware, we have 3 land. So Delaware Solid Waste, once we were created, we set up a series of landfills. We have 3 landfills, 1 for each county. There's only 3 counties in Delaware. So the northernmost county, the central, and the southern were broken. Delaware's kind of a long, narrow state, similar to Vermont in that we have geographically the smallest county by land also happens to be the most populated county, and we have a landfill and a transfer station there. And then in the central part of the state, which is where the state capital is of Dover, there's less people, but a little more land, and there's also a landfill and a transfer station there as well. And then we have Sussex County, which is the biggest by land, and is very seasonal because we have our resorts there, we have our beaches there. So in the summer, it's almost double the population of the state because we have so many people coming from Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, that come to that area to vacation for the summer. So we have a huge population growth in the summer and not as big in the other months of the year. So we have a landfill there and a transfer station there as well. So we have 3 landfills, 3 transfer stations. Unlike Maine and Vermont, we do not have a capacity crisis because of the way we set up our planning for our landfills. We sited those relatively early, and we were able to acquire large quantities of land at the time of siting them. And we've also, over the years, anytime anyone adjacent to one of those properties want to sell, we're always willing to buy that property to have extra buffer zone because, as Susan said, a lot of people don't like landfills. They don't want to be next to landfills. And we're fortunate enough to have our landfills, for the most part, some distance between residents and the landfills themselves. We have approximately 100 years of capacity in Delaware. Now that's statewide capacity. That's not each individual landfill. So we don't have 300 years. We have 100 years total when you combine all the capacity of the 3 landfills. The most capacity is in the central part of the state. And that's mainly because it's the least populated of the 3 counties, and it generates the least amount of trash. When our organization was set up, the people who drafted the legislation were very wise to keep Delaware a very closed loop state. And what I mean by that is we're not allowed to import any waste from out of state. And we also don't export any waste to other states. So we manage all the waste that's generated in Delaware. And we also don't take any waste from anybody else. And even if we wanted to, we can't, because it's in the state, it's written in the state law that way. And the reason that's not a violation of the Commerce Clause is because, as Susan pointed out, these are all state owned. They're all these facilities are owned by Delaware Solid Waste Authority. And we're also kind of fortunate. There's no there's no privately owned landfills in operation in Delaware, with the exception of a C&D, construction and demolition landfill that's in Newcastle County, but that is like closing soon. So as far as municipal solid waste goes, there's only 3 landfills, and they're all owned by Delaware Solid Waste Authority. So our organization we do everything. We do the waste, we do all the recycling programs. We do the statewide plan, which we work on every 10 years. We have a 10-year plan we use every 10 years. And of course, like, capacity is a huge part of that, because, as Susan pointed out, waste generation has gone up. But just to give you some idea, like, we still, in 2006, Delaware hit the highest amount of waste generated in the state was 1.2 million tons of municipal solid waste. And we've not hit that number since 2006, because in 2008, when the recession hit, we dropped all the way down to somewhere in the neighborhood of 560,000 tons. So more than half of that waste went away because of the economic reasons that go behind it. So, when we do capacity planning, and when we do waste generation expectations, sure, we always go on a curve that's up, because we always expect population to grow and economy to grow, and those things generate more waste. But the reality is, when you have things like recession that hit, you can really diminish the amount of waste. And the reason that didn't kill the authority, a lot of people would say, the way, just so you know, the way we're based is all the revenue that we spend as a solid waste authority is generated from tipping fees at the landfills. So we don't get any state taxpayer money. We don't get any federal taxpayer money. We are self-sufficient in that we own the landfills, and we charge a fee to the haulers to collect the waste and bring it to the landfill. And not just the haulers, but we also charge municipalities as well if they collect. I mean, Delaware is different than Vermont in that there's not as many municipalities. We have municipalities, but most of the people in Delaware live in what we call unincorporated areas, where the government of, the local government would be your county government, not so much a town. Now, there are towns, don't get me wrong, but there's not as many. And even, like, there's only 7 municipalities that collect waste in Delaware. So most of it's collected by the private haulers, private companies, big companies that you would know, like Waste Management. We have Waste Management, we have Casella, we have Republic, like, they collect. But there's also what we call, like, locally owned trash companies, small trash companies too. And they all can collect anywhere in Delaware, and they can they all can bring that material to the Delaware Solid Waste Authority. So that system's worked well, but when recession hits and you lose that revenue, a lot of people say, well, why didn't you guys go under? Like, you lost half of your revenue. Well, fortunate for us, we had the ability to cut back. At that time in 2006, we had 200 employees. Well, we dropped down to like 98 employees. Like, that's just the reality. We can expand and contract as an organization as we need to, depending on the needs of the state, which is something, it's a harsh reality when you're in the business, but it's what you have to do in order to survive the economy of scale. When I was talking about recycling, we also do all the recycling for the state. When we started out, we did mostly drop-off centers for recycling, and we had that system in place for a long time. We had 160 drop-off centers in Delaware. That's a lot considering how small we are. And that was basically, nobody had to drive more than 5 or 6 minutes to get to a drop-off center because they were literally everywhere. And that system worked okay, but the reality was a lot of people weren't recycling because a lot of people didn't want to load up their car and take it to a drop-off center. People wanted curbside recycling. We eventually did create a curbside recycling law, which we call the Universal Recycling Law, which basically gave every single household that has trash service, the trash hauler that provided that service also had to provide recycling service. And they had to charge one fee for both services, and they couldn't separate the fee. And what we mean by that is you can't charge $25 for trash and $25 for recycling. You had to charge $50 total for both. And the reason that was important was so people couldn't say, well, I don't want the recycling, I only want the trash. They had to get both services. Now, they didn't have to, it wasn't mandatory recycling in that they had to put recycling out, but it was certainly, they had to pay for the service, which for the most part prompted people to actually use the service. And so we went from about 40,000 to 50,000 households recycling to like every single household in the state recycling overnight when that law passed. So that allowed us to build a MRF. We have a MRF in the northern part of the state that processes about 130,000 tons of single stream recycling every year. And we also have the transfer stations for the southern parts of the state to transfer that recycling up to it. So we process all our single stream, and by controlling the landfills and controlling the waste, it also allows us to pay for all the shortfalls, because as you heard Susan say, recycling costs more than landfilling. That's true. So we have to supplement our recycling programs, and we do that through the landfill tipping fees. And that allows us to have programs like we have household battery recycling, we have a styrofoam recycling program, we have oil filters, we have used oil. We have HHW collection, we have document shredding, we have electronics recycling programs. So these are all statewide programs that are provided to the homeowner at no charge. So they don't pay out of pocket, but of course, when you pay for your trash bill, you are paying for those services because it's included in our tipping fee. So the tipping fee, certain percentage of that tipping fee is going to help pay for all those recycling programs we have in place. It really allowed us to have a really comprehensive recycling program. And, we didn't really have that in place until 2011. So we were kind of late to the game, but now I feel like even though we came late to the game, we probably have one of the better systems out there because we have everything we need and we can pay for everything that we want to do without, having to go. Not saying EPR is a bad thing, but we don't really need a lot of EPR money because we have the money to do the programs ourselves, which has been very fortunate for us to have that kind of comprehensive program without having to get some legislation and collect some fees and have all the things that go with spreading that money around, all the complications that go with that. So For the most part, that's a pretty good summary of what our system looks like. And I'll definitely entertain questions either now or at the end, however you want to do that.
Mike, thank you so much. I wanted to ask you about flow control briefly. I recall you or who I've talked to, your predecessor too, Rick Watson, about flow control. You have the ability to do it, but you don't need to because of your competitive pricing. Do I have that right?
So we do have flow control in place, a regulatory through Delaware solid waste authority regulations. We decided to put it in place after the United decision that the Supreme Court made as kind of a safety net. But the reality was we'd had it in place for many years before we did that, because we did contractual agreements with a rebate program for haulers. That's how we got flow control in place, because otherwise, like we were talking about the Commerce Clause, yeah, we can prevent waste from coming in from out of state, but you can't prevent it from going to other states without the certain criteria that the Supreme Court laid out in the United decision, which we have in Delaware. But you wouldn't have that if you had a privately owned landfill. So we can only do it because we have state-owned landfills.
Right. Mike, super helpful. Thank you so much. Tom Kennedy has a question. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, Mike, thank you. It's helpful. What is your tipping fee charges? What are you charging?
So
per
right
ton,
now,
I guess.
yeah. So right now we have an $80 per ton tipping fee at the landfills. But for haulers that collect waste, they get a $10 rebate on each ton so that happens every 6 months. So it's a $70 net tip fee.
Wow.
Bargain.
That's very inexpensive compared to up here. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah. Other quick questions for Mike?
What's the point of that $10 reduction?
So originally it was what we used as our flow control measure. But when we switched over to regulatory flow control, we decided to keep that rebate program in place. And instead what we've done is we have a program called Community Cleanup, which in order for a hauler to qualify for the $10 rebate, they have to donate a certain amount of dumpsters each year for community cleanup programs throughout the state, which we manage. So they will provide roll-off cans to neighborhoods to do cleanups throughout the year at no charge. And then DSWA will waive the tip fee on those tonnage for them to pick up those cans and bring them in. And in exchange for that, they get a $10 rebate by signing the agreement. What we call a differential disposal fee agreement, but it's basically an agreement that allows them to get a $10 rebate if they participate in our community cleanup program.
Interesting, huh?
Like green up there. And Mike, I would assume the authority has like a bond for closure on the landfills.
So we don't have a bond. So we keep money in our reserve, in reserve capacity. So we have investments, and we also have just money in reserve funds, in reserve accounts that we keep for post-closure care costs. But we could go to bonds if we had to. We have the ability to borrow. Like we have done bonds in the past for projects, landfill expansion projects, things like that. Currently, we don't have any outstanding bonds or debt, so we are debt free at this time. And we have we have $75 million set aside for post-closure care costs.
That's substantial.
That'll do.
Mike, thanks so much. This is really interesting to hear your model and what you've done in Delaware. if you can hang with us, great. If you can't, no problem. We wrap up at 4. I want to make sure I give time for Tom Kennedy. And as you hear Mike and Suzanne about our story in Vermont, we go back. We have a similar story of that sanitary landfill era, going back to an act called Act 78 in Vermont, which really started to take effect in the 90s. And Tom Kennedy's with the Greater Upper Valley Solid Waste District. Can talk about a greenfield landfill site that they own and also some of that history. Tom, I turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So, hey, Josh, I'm Tom Kennedy. Also, I'm wearing another hat here. I'm also the vice chair of the select board in Heartland, where the landfill, we were trying to get a landfill built. But in the 1990s, the Greater Upper Valley Solid Waste District purchased 110 acres of what I would call a perfect site for a landfill. The landfill is accessed by a private road. There are no neighbors except for a very large sand and gravel operation. In the mid 1990s, they started the permitting process, and they went through trying to get their solid waste facilities permit, which they did receive, and their Act 250 permit. For those of you that don't live in Vermont, Act 250 is our state land use law. It is quite rigorous and very rigorous when it comes to siting of landfills. The district ran into a considerable amount of concerns by Heartland, which was considered to be the host community, and Hartford, the town of Hartford, which is adjacent to the site. In order to get concurrence from those two communities, they developed individual host agreements. And those host agreements, a quick synopsis is that the solid waste district agreed to provide 7.5% to each community of the net income coming out of the landfill, which as we move forward was a real problem in trying to get one of the difficulties that the district was having in actually building the landfill is that the bond company wanted to have waste guarantees for folks who wanted to use it. And the guarantees had to be a minimum of 10 years. They struggled getting those guarantees, being good Yankees and so on. Many of the municipalities and a couple of the solid waste districts said, we don't really want to have to be indebted to you for 10 years. Would you take a 5-year or something along those lines? And the other issue was the startup cost, the price per ton was going to be far exceed the market price per ton. And I don't remember what it was, but the landfill in northern Vermont, and then right adjacent to the town of Heartland in Lebanon, New Hampshire, is the Lebanon landfill. And compared to the Lebanon landfill, the proposed Heartland landfill would have been almost double the cost. I think at that time, the Lebanon landfill was around $35 a ton. The other issue they had in developing this site is they didn't have direct access to that private road. And so they had to go through an adjacent community to do that. And that they knew that they could, that would have been a short-term effort. And so what the solid waste district decided to do is to build a bridge across the interstate in Heartland, Vermont. And so if you're on 91 heading north, you can see this bridge that goes across the interstate right before the rest area there. That bridge cost the solid waste district about $1.9 million. And again, even with the bridge and so on, they were not successful in trying to get enough tonnage to come into the landfill. So they postponed doing that. About 10 years later, We tried again to see if we can get people to build a landfill, but before we did that, we hired a consulting firm out of New Hampshire to look at the existing drawings we had. And oh, I'm sorry, I didn't say this. The size of the landfill that Greater River Valley was thinking of purchasing would be 40,000 to 50,000 tons per year. The firm came back and said, to make this profitable, you would have to size a landfill at between 350 and 400,000 tons per year to have any form of profitability. We then, with that in mind, we then did a request for interest to see whether or not we could get anyone to look at it and to try to develop the site. And we actually were unsuccessful, and we attracted one person, but they weren't particularly realistic about what it would cost. But in doing our due diligence on that, we found that it would cost just to develop the planning and do everything in the first cell, you're looking at around $5 to $7 million. And again, that was an issue for us in that the developer wanted us to partner with them on some of these upfront costs. And being a small solid waste district, we already had, today we have about $800,000 of debt remaining on the bridge. Today, which makes this all so interesting, is like what is going on in Maine to a certain extent. The Lebanon landfill, they have decided that they really do not want to attract trash from outside the city of Lebanon or a couple of the adjacent communities, and they have now started to dramatically increase their prices to discourage usage at the Lebanon landfill. And they're also making it very, very difficult in taking C&D into the landfill. They are very, very fussy as far as what goes into the landfill, with the end result being that most of the larger haulers are no longer bringing in C&Ds because they're getting so many rejected loads. They're rejecting loads for things like you have fiberglass attached to some of the C&D and things like this. So what we're now seeing is larger haulers are now looking to New York State. They're finding that the pricing is cheaper to go to New York State than it is to go up to Coventry. The difficulty that they have is they are given a certain tonnage amount, and if they exceed that tonnage amount, they can try to get an extension of that, but they also can shut them off. And last year, a number of haulers got shut off, and so then they were kind of scrambling for what's going on. Wearing my Heartland Select Board hat, in the 25 years since the district has tried to do this, the community has really changed. It is now becoming a bedroom community to Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center, the college, and the like. And I would say the appetite for the citizenry to see a landfill at this great site for a landfill would be very, very difficult. It would be really tough to do. So that's my story.
Thank you, Tom.
welcome.
Tom, we may have some people in Vermont that have questions for you, or for Susanne and Mike, if they so wish to ask them. Anyone want to raise their hand and ask a question of Tom? We also have John Leddy here, but I'll take a seat, see if there's any questions. Yeah, go ahead, Peggy.
Yeah, this is very interesting. I knew about the Heartland site, but I really didn't get the background. So that is very interesting. So are you saying that the Heartland, the town itself, was trying to develop this landfill?
No, the solid waste district was developing the landfill. What you'll see in developing sites like this, where you're going to be developing a lot of traffic, or as Susanne said, the icky smell stuff, you generally have to have these what they call host agreements, which really is like in planning world, it's an impact fee. And you, when negotiating these things, you're at a real disadvantage because you need to get these host communities to support your project. And so the Greater Upper Valley, it's somewhat unfortunate in that they have two adjacent communities that would be directly impacted. So the Act 250, one of the permit conditions is to come up with host agreements, which added a lot of expense to operating the landfill.
Yep. Okay, there was something else you said too. I'll be quick. You said that somehow haulers found it was cheaper to go to New York than Coventry,
Yes. Yep.
but then
That's
but then they got shut off, you said?
No, so what they do is, and I think is again, Suzanne sort of touched upon this, is you know, these landfills are trying to control how much waste is going into the facilities, both to limit how quickly the facility is being is being filled up, and secondly, I'm sure they have some of the same issues that others have. I'm getting a lot of feedback. Is is that they are only allowed to take so much out of state waste. But these landfills in New York State are enormous. So I think, and Josh, you know Barry better than I think one of them's a million tons a year or something like that, over 1,000,000 tons. Very large.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. We have a hand raised by Patricia Coe. Shannon, can you unmute Patricia Coe? Maybe I can. No, I guess I can't. Maybe.
I can only mute. I can't unmute.
Okay. I think that might be Henry Coe. Henry, if you can unmute, go ahead. We can't hear you at the moment. All right, well, Tom, thank you so much. We'll come back to Henry, and Henry, feel free to put your question in the chat if you want to type it out. John Leddy, are you still with us? It's hard for me to see on my mini screen here. There he is. All right. So
I'm
Tom,
here.
Thanks so much. We got the story of the Greater Upper Valley District, which for anybody can look at the map at 802recycles.com. You can see that district's geography. And now we have John Leddy with the Northwest Solid Waste District facility in Georgia, but covers a wide territory, Franklin County and beyond. Go ahead, John.
Yeah. So thanks for having me. By way of introduction, I am the director of the Northwest Solid Waste District. We represent Franklin and Grand Isle counties in the northwest corner of the state. Our population is about 52,000 over those two counties. And we do have a permitted, at least through the Department of Environmental Conservation, a permitted landfill facility. The district purchased the site and began this project in the mid-90s. And after the purchase of the site, went to permit it through the state. The design and permitting came up with it's a 154-acre parcel. The project currently has 2 cells designed. Those 2 cells total 14 acres. So this is a really small facility. Only 1 cell is permitted during the certification period that we're currently in, but we have not taken any steps to construct the landfill to begin this process. And that's because during the construction or the engineering and design phase, they estimated that, the filling the tipping fee, sorry, it's a little distracting here. The tipping fee would need to be set at $150 a ton in order to pay for construction and post-closure costs. and that was in the late 90s. So after the district went through, got certification for the facility, they then shelved the project. So we don't currently have Act 250 permitting. They didn't even follow through with that step. And they just sort of put the certification on the shelf, and the project in general, because the $150 a ton tipping fee we would have needed to charge was about twice what residents were paying at that point. That if you put that in today's dollars, it would be like $288 a ton. And that's, again, it's about twice of what we're paying currently. Also, there is the size of the landfill, which the total capacity is engineered for 320,000 tons. The annual capacity is 20,000 tons, and our district in 2024 landfilled just under 40,000 tons, so twice the annual capacity that is currently permitted. So those were the challenges that we've faced, and again, our board of supervisors at our district has shelved this project. We are due for recertification about a year from now, and so we are looking at that and figuring out whether we want to keep the certification active and put the investment into a recertification, and what, based on what our plans might be. So that's where we're at, and definitely welcome to hear any questions.
Thank you, John. In the chat, I think it's Henry Coe, Patricia Coe asked, in Vermont, are solid waste districts considered public facilities, therefore able to restrict import of out-of-state waste? And I'll leave that for John. Maybe you can take that first, and then Tom.
We are public facilities. We're a municipal entity. We're like the school district for trash that's made up of our member municipalities. Whether that allows us the restriction, that I'm uncertain of. A lot of my district's work on this landfill is before my time. So Tom probably.
What I would add is Vermont makes it difficult to take in out-of-state waste because the community where the waste is coming from, and Shannon and Josh, correct me if I'm wrong, they have to have a SWIP. And when you start to talk to out-of-state towns about SWIPs and things like this, it turns them off pretty quickly to do that. But I find that to be probably the largest issue as far as that's concerned. I know there's a whole issue, and Mike talked about interstate commerce and about not allowing it, but the SWIP does a very good job of controlling it.
Yeah, I can vouch for that. So I think, Mr. Coe, generally speaking, these are solid waste districts are municipal entities. They're chartered. They're recognized by the legislative body of the state of Vermont as a chartered municipality, able to pass ordinances and to build facilities for the public good, like a landfill, and therefore follow the flow control pathway that is defendable in the Supreme Court cases that Mike was highlighting in his dialogue. But one of the existing prohibitions we have is the solid waste implementation plan process, the SWIP, SWIP for our folks from out of state. And that does and continues to this day to block out of state waste to some extent. There is special waste that are excluded from that, sludge, soils, some C&D waste materials, and some what's called municipal solid waste residue from a MRF. When the recycling facility sorts stuff, we do take in quite a bit of of basically recycling residue from Massachusetts. But generally speaking, Vermont has pretty good systems in place to prevent out-of-state waste through the planning process, requiring any municipality sending us waste to meet Vermont's rules and regulations. It's like Mike talked about with recycling. We have followed the universal recycling pathway of Delaware, borrowing the name as well, and even mandating recycling in that. Let me pause there. Anyone in the room have questions? We really ended here today in the wind up on two of our solid waste districts talking about the regional landfill vision, which I know people here today have talked a lot about and discussed why that isn't the reality in the landscape. And I think the financials that Tom presented and John Leddy are really stark in their high cost and their short time frame of operation for some of these places. There was kind of alluded to in Tom's tonnage that he talked about, and also, John, you alluded to it in the small acreage that was planned initially. It just takes a lot of effort to build a facility as sizable as like Mike has with 100 years capacity. Those are big facilities, obviously. And then Maine has multiple sites, which is positive in terms of capacity. You have some struggles with where they're operating currently. It'd be nice if some of them could open up some capacity as you dialogue. Let me see if there's any questions from those listening in. You want to raise your hand and ask a question. That would be perfectly good at this time for our discussion phase. Or anybody in the room too. Well, I have one, and with folks like Delaware and Maine here, where there's a lot of talk about the value of the state running a landfill. Or we heard from Eco Maine, Susanne, would be interesting. We had Kevin, actually not Kevin Roche. I talked to him, but he had his Eric, one of his staff person come, and Eric was phenomenal in the detail he shared. It's a pretty, politically ambitious undertaking to have. They started out with, I think, 20 towns or so, and now they have 70. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of history. People in Vermont have thought about how can we follow Maine in that endeavor. I think in some cases what I hear is you need a crisis to happen. You need high costs and people to pay attention to waste, because we're forgotten about until it becomes, piling up somewhere. And I hate to say it that way, but that is how solid waste is. Any comment from you, Susanne, on that? What you know about waste in Maine, that type of history and action, what drives action?
I think you nailed it, but I also think Southern Maine is a different beast than the rest of the state, right? So Southern Maine is very highly populated. There's infrastructure for, there's more money, there's better roads and infrastructure available. There's the desire by the community to have more, to have a facility like Eco Maine. The northern half of the state is much more rural. There are lots of small decentralized communities. The big communities that are more centralized are the Bangor area. The Juniper Ridge landfill is just north of Bangor in Old Town, so it's about 10 minutes north. And that location was chosen because it was a former paper mill, and that paper mill was going under, and it was just basically an agreement by the state to take over that location. It just kind of panned out that way. But the unfortunate reality of that location is it is, close enough to people's homes, and maybe by Portland standards, it wouldn't seem so close to homes, but by Northern Maine standards, it's really too close, right? People like to spread out and have their own 5 acres and just, feel like they're far from everybody. The other piece to this is not too far away is also a tribal community. So that's a whole nother layer of environmental justice issues to think about. Because the culture is so different, what we're hearing a lot is, this is an environmental justice issue because all the state's waste is going to this one community, this one area. It's affecting the tribes, it's affecting this town. And why are we taking the state's waste? Why isn't it spread out more? Most of the waste is generated down in Cumberland County in Portland. Why is it coming up here? And so, there's some validity to those questions, right? And so I think that's just another piece of it, which is, so how do we get like an eco Maine model up in a rural community like that? I don't know. I don't know if that can work. There has to be buy-in. There has to be cultural, buy-in.
Yeah, I always talk about economies of scale in Vermont, and you guys have, especially when you get into your rural areas, we share a lot in common. I see some of the things you said, Suzanne, hitting the nail on the head. We have heard the same in this dialogue, that for years, really, that our rural area is taking the bulk of the state's waste. Our landfill, the landfill, the one in Maine that's operating, takes about 80 to 85% of the state's waste. And that's where it goes. I mean, justifiably, that is factual. I see Peggy has her hand up. Go ahead, Peggy.
Thank you. This is just so interesting. I wish I could sit down with you guys and at a table and talk some more. But I totally hear you, Suzanne. We live up near the state's only landfill in Coventry, one of the most rural areas of the state. So the environmental justice issue is real, and I think it deserves respect in this discussion. I'm also fascinated, Mr. Parkowski, Mike, because I would love to know more about how the state of Delaware, the Waste Authority, developed 3 landfills, and you don't probably have to answer. I just want to put this out on the table as much for you, Josh, to be thinking about. How did Delaware, which is such a small state with more people than Vermont, come up with the plan to develop 3 landfills in very obviously, very specifically cited ways? I would just love to know what your state authority, the board, what process they went through to figure that out. Because I do believe that's what we need to do in Vermont to the extent possible. Thank you.
I don't know if I can answer the whole thing, but I'll just really quickly say we were very fortunate in our timing in that, we were the authority was developed, like I said, in 1975. The state was nowhere near the population it is now at that time. So we had especially in Sussex and Kent County, which are the middle and southern part of the state, very rural areas that had a lot of land available at that time. That simply isn't the case now. So if we were to start over today, it would look a lot different. We would have a lot of the same problems that Vermont has, a lot of the same problems that Maine has. The difference is we were fortunate in that we started our planning process in the mid 70s, and at the time we acquired a lot of land knowing that those are going to be the sites for landfills. And quite frankly, if we had to site a landfill somewhere other than our 3 locations, we probably wouldn't be able to do it.
Mike, can we talk a little bit about your formation and also your current operations competing or not with the private sector? So just briefly, I know from some of the quick conversation we had that you have a lot of private activity hauling the waste in Delaware, and they come to you, and you haven't really had to, really push flow control because you have competitive tip fees, and the haulers feel like they can compete, basically collecting material, and that you guys don't run the trucks, they do. But even before that, I'm aware that some solid waste authorities, and I want for Peggy and others listening, there is a dialogue at state houses when these ideas come up. Well, how does this authority compete with the private sector? And sometimes the discussion I've heard has been, well, do we need to form it if the private sector is able to manage it? If they're not able to manage it, remember Mike was talking about these unlined dumps that the counties were running. There was a big move to change that. And so there was a public need at that time identified, and the Solid Waste Authority came into being. That takes political will and attention. Maine is getting some attention. Vermont, we're paying attention to the extent we can. What do you think about that private sector argument about whether government steps in or the private sector solves it, so to speak.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. And I would say that the thing about Delaware that, again, the timing was very good because there really were like Waste Management and Republic. Well, Republic wasn't. It was, we at that time it was BFI and some of these really big waste companies. They weren't all that interested in Delaware as an entity because we weren't a major hub. Like we didn't have a big population. We didn't have big industry. We didn't have a lot of dollars to be made. So, there was a time in the 70s where there were certain houses in Sussex County that couldn't even get trash service because it wasn't densely populated like it is now. And so people, the private sector didn't really want to get involved. And so we kind of were born out of necessity in that if you wanted trash service for Kent and Sussex County in Delaware, it was going to have to be initiative of the state to get it done. No one was really concerned with Delaware Solid Waste building a landfill in Jones Crossroads, Delaware, because there really was nothing there. And so at the time, it was just very good timing, very good forethought by the creators of the authority to know that, hey, there will be a day when people will live down here and we will need this capacity. But for many, many years, hardly any waste at all went into those facilities because there wasn't a lot of people there. And now, of course, it's changed. But yeah, I think it's all about timing, and it's all about the current situation you're in, which obviously you're in a much different situation than we were in 1975.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I appreciate that. I'm aware from the Rhode Island Resource Recovery Association, their formation was similar, small geography and a big population, or now big today. They formed a long time ago as well. But there's sometimes in the formation, there's even anti-compete sort of language, like, should the private sector ever take this over, we'll stand down and deform. I don't know if that's even realistic, but I've heard about this in the formation, and there's just an interesting history to Solid Waste Authority model that's worth knowing for those that get really interested in it.
Yeah, I mean, if you read our statute, one of the things that's really prominent in it is we are directed to the best possible ways to work with private companies. So like all throughout our organization, we contract with private entities to run the facilities, to run some of the programs. So it's not just the state doing all the work. We have a lot of contracts with private companies to do a lot of the work. So I think that to your point, yes, like that was woven into our founding legislation.
And going back to Suzanne's presentation, it was interesting to hear about Juniper Ridge and who you contract with, Casella, and how they actually have a special agreement to take financial, sort of the risk, I'll say, for the finances long term. That comes at a price and some control. They have some control you talked about. So I just think these are worth, when you hear all these stories, you put them together and similar themes come out of it. You have to have economies of scale to build it. You have to deal with the community where it is located. The impact fees Tom Kennedy talked about is an interesting word for it. I hadn't heard that before. And so this is what the recipe is for things to move, or in the case of our two municipalities from Vermont here, where they just don't move. This infrastructure is available potentially, but it hasn't really opened up yet. And there's some reasons why, and some real, I think, just lessons to be learned from the dialogue. So we're at time, 4 o'clock. I want to make sure I'm respecting everybody's time. Can't thank the speakers enough. These models are really interesting to dig into and to hear your challenges and opportunities. It's given us a lot to think about. And also to my Vermont colleagues, John Leddy and Tom Kennedy, thanks for being here and sharing the story. It's always interesting. I always learn a little bit more each time you guys tell it. For us at the state, we have a lot to process from these discussions. So we are going to be doing that, taking some time to just look through all the meetings we've had and we'll be back in touch with all of you as to next steps. But it's, my head is thinking about a lot of things right now, so I have to let that settle and then come back to you with ideas and meet with our team internally. Any last thoughts? And Dennis, anything that I'm missing? Anybody in the room? Shannon, anything I'm missing there? I think Shannon's going to be doing notes as before, so you can stay tuned for that. And she's done a great job keeping our website up to date for anybody who wants to re-listen to things or find some of the notes. They're there. Thanks to Shannon Choquette. With that, I will let people go and have a great afternoon. Thanks again to our speakers. I can't thank you enough. It's really informative.